At a glance, Clint Walker and James Arness seemed like a match made in Western TV heaven, two tall, imposing men who ruled the small screen with their commanding presence. Walker became the face of Cheyenne, while Arness embodied Marshal Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke. Both had that rugged, all-American look, the kind that made audiences stop flipping channels and tune in week after week. But behind the stoic faces and cowboy hats, something far less friendly was brewing. Though their shows aired during the same era, Walker and Arness rarely crossed paths publicly. Still, their names were constantly mentioned together. Fans compared their characters, their performances, even who had the better on-screen brawl. Some thought the quiet competition fueled both actors to perform at their best. But others noticed something else, an edge. A tension that didn't feel like friendly rivalry. Industry whispers started small. There were stories of icy encounters at events, cold shoulders backstage, and the kind of polite avoidance that told you everything without a single word being said. Arness was known to keep his circle tight, and Walker, though friendly with fans, wasn't the kind to pretend if he didn't like someone. And apparently, he didn't like Arness at all. The reasons were never clear on the surface. There wasn't a dramatic outburst or public feud. But people who paid attention started noticing patterns. Interviews where Walker would pause a little too long when asked about other Western stars, and moments where Arness looked downright annoyed when Walker's name came up. It wasn't what they said that gave it away. It was what they didn't. While both men portrayed strong, silent types on screen, the silence off screen was even louder. And it wasn't the kind that came from mutual respect. It was the kind that hinted at something unresolved. Something personal. It makes you wonder, what really happened between these two legends of the Wild West? Why did Clint Walker, admired for his calm presence, carry such a visible disdain for someone who, to the public, had done nothing to deserve it? Whatever it was, it started early in their careers and never quite faded. But the full story doesn't end there. Because once you dig beneath the surface of Hollywood smiles and cowboy charm, you'll find that this wasn't just about ego or fame. What came next changed the way people saw both men forever. The tension between Clint Walker and James Arness didn't explode in some dramatic on-set argument. Instead, it began with a quiet, uncomfortable encounter that set the tone for everything that followed. It happened early in their careers, when both were just starting to make a name for themselves in the Western genre. A small studio gathering, meant to celebrate the rising stars of television, turned into the spark that lit the fuse. Walker had arrived at the event as one of Warner Brothers' biggest new investments. Tall, stoic, and exuding confidence, he was being groomed to lead the network's Western charge with Cheyenne. Arness, on the other hand, had already landed the role of Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke and was seen as the unofficial face of the genre. Both men were stars, but only one could be the king of the Westerns. And Hollywood thrives on competition. According to those present, Arness barely acknowledged Walker that night. Whether it was arrogance or a power play, no one could say for sure. But Walker took it personally. He had been raised on values like respect and professionalism, and to be publicly brushed off in front of executives and peers didn't sit well. From that moment on, there was no chance of a friendship forming, only quiet resentment. Things only got worse when comparisons started rolling in from the press. Magazine covers started asking, who was the real Western icon? Some critics claimed Arness was more believable as a lawman, while others praised Walker's quiet strength and physical presence. The media loved pitting them against each other, and both men noticed. Behind the scenes, it became clear that the industry was fueling the rivalry. Producers would mention one actor in meetings with the other, planting seeds of jealousy and doubt. Walker reportedly hated how Arness was often painted as the serious actor, while he was seen as just a handsome face. Meanwhile, Arness wasn't thrilled with the way Walker was quickly gaining popularity and being cast as a heroic figure just as iconic as Matt Dillon. The distance between them grew with each passing year. They never spoke publicly about the incident at the gathering, but those who knew them said it created a silent wall neither one wanted to break down. Instead of smoothing things over, they leaned into the competition, letting their work speak louder than words. Still, Hollywood isn't always what it seems. What started as a bruised ego may have evolved into something deeper and far more personal. Because once one private disagreement happens in front of powerful people, reputations start shifting. And what happened next took their quiet feud into darker territory. As their careers continued to rise, Clint Walker and James Arness weren't just competing for attention, they were quietly trying to outmaneuver each other. What started as icy distance slowly evolved into subtle acts of professional sabotage. This wasn't the kind of feud that erupted in yelling matches or tabloid headlines. It was colder, more strategic, and far more damaging. In Hollywood, word spreads quickly, sometimes whispered in casting offices, other times through agents trying to push one client over another. It didn't take long before Clint Walker began hearing that his name was being dropped from potential projects, and he suspected Arness had something to do with it. Though there was no smoking gun, the timing always seemed too perfect. Just when Walker was in talks for a high-profile Western film, rumors would conveniently surface about him being difficult or too green for the role. Arness, on the other hand, had the clout of Gunsmoke, one of the most powerful shows on TV. His network loyalty and strong ratings gave him leverage few actors had at the time. While he maintained a clean public image, it's believed that behind the scenes, he wasn't shy about voicing his opinions about fellow actors, especially those threatening his spotlight. Some producers even claimed he would pass on a script if Walker was being considered for a guest role or co-starring opportunity. Walker wasn't innocent either. He reportedly turned down a role in a high-budget ensemble Western film after learning Arness was being considered as a secondary lead. He didn't want to play second fiddle to a man he believed had no respect for him. Worse, he feared the media would spin the pairing as some kind of reunion or rivalry gimmick, diminishing both their reputations. The decision cost him a major paycheck, but it sent a clear message. He wasn't backing down. Meanwhile, their feud seeped into the Hollywood rumor mill. Directors and studio executives started treating them like oil and water, keeping them on separate projects and avoiding any potential collaboration. The idea of casting them in the same film was considered a logistical nightmare. It wasn't just about clashing egos. There was real discomfort, real tension. Fans, however, never knew the full story. On screen, both men embodied calm, rugged masculinity. Off-screen, they were embroiled in a cold war of influence and silent backstabbing. And the deeper they got into the industry, the more entrenched their rivalry became. But even sabotage has limits. When one scandal hit the headlines that nearly brought both careers to a standstill, their bitter rivalry would be forced into the public eye in a way neither expected, and it wasn't going to be pretty. Hollywood thrives on secrets until they're no longer secrets. And for Clint Walker and James Arness, the moment everything threatened to unravel came with a scandal neither of them saw coming. It wasn't about money or casting or even on-set behavior. This time, it was about reputation and survival. The spark? A leaked conversation between two well-connected studio insiders who let it slip that both Walker and Arness had engaged in behind-the-scenes manipulation to block each other from major roles. While the identities of the sources were never officially confirmed, the whispers spread like wildfire. Industry circles were buzzing. Executives who once kept the rivalry under wraps now had no choice but to acknowledge it. And worse, the press caught wind. Although the headlines were cautious, phrases like creative disputes and personal tensions softened the blow. The message was clear. Two of TV's biggest Western stars were not just rivals, they were enemies. The public hadn't seen this side of them before. Their fans believed they were larger-than-life heroes with iron morals. But this revelation painted a far more human and far more flawed picture. Walker was furious. He believed the leak had come from someone in Arness's camp, especially given the conveniently flattering tone the rumors took toward Arness. Arness, meanwhile, kept quiet, refusing to comment publicly. That silence only made things worse. To many in the press, his silence looked like guilt, or worse, arrogance. As the tension built, producers became cautious. One studio reportedly pulled the plug on a project meant to revive Clint Walker's film career because they feared media attention would turn the film into a sideshow about the feud. Another project Arness was developing stalled out amid concerns that the scandal would overshadow the story itself. The damage was done. Public trust began to waver, and both actors felt the sting in their careers. Though neither man ever addressed the scandal directly, their interviews in the years that followed were noticeably colder and more guarded. Gone was the easy confidence. In its place, a watchful, calculated tone, like they knew anything could be twisted or used against them. And yet, even in the middle of the fallout, there was a moment of eerie calm. No lawsuits, no dramatic public blowouts. Just two men, stubborn to the core, determined to outlast the storm and each other. They let the scandal fizzle out quietly, betting that time would erase the headlines and restore their images. But time wouldn't erase what was already set in motion. The rivalry had become something darker, something personal. And what happened next would push Clint Walker to the brink of walking away from Hollywood altogether. For a man who built his image on strength, stoicism, and frontier resilience, Clint Walker reached his breaking point behind closed doors. The tension with James Arness, the scandals, and the constant pressure to maintain a spotless public image had quietly chipped away at him. He wasn't just battling a rival anymore, he was battling the weight of a system that never let him breathe. What most fans didn't know was how deeply the Hollywood machine tried to mold Walker into a specific type of man. He was tall, muscular, and had that silent cowboy charm. Studios didn't want him to speak out. They didn't want him to challenge scripts, question casting decisions, or reveal personal struggles. But Clint was never just a pretty face. He had opinions, values, and most of all, pride. The feud with Arness had stripped him of something vital. When producers began choosing Arness for roles that could have revived Clint's career, it was more than a business decision. It felt like betrayal. One particular incident hit him hard. A role Clint had quietly pursued for months, one that would have marked a dramatic departure from his usual stoic cowboy type, was suddenly handed to Arness. No audition. No explanation. Just gone. Friends say that's when he started changing. On set, he was still professional, but quieter. Less engaged. At home, he withdrew even more. The man who once joked with crew members and stayed late to help young actors rehearse now left as soon as the cameras stopped rolling. He wasn't angry in an explosive, headline-making way, but his silence spoke volumes. Then came the offer that should have reignited everything. A major film studio approached him with a gritty western that would position him as a tragic hero, older, wiser, and more complex than any role he'd ever taken. But Clint shocked everyone. He turned it down, not because he didn't like the script, and not because he didn't need the work. He was just done. Done playing Hollywood's game. Done chasing roles that would be handed to someone else the moment the phone rang in Arness's office. For Clint Walker, it wasn't about quitting. It was about reclaiming control. He knew the toll the rivalry had taken, not just on his career, but on his mental and emotional well-being. Hollywood had asked him to be bulletproof, but even cowboys bleed eventually. The decision to walk away wasn't loud or public. No grand press conference. No bitter farewell. Just a quiet exit, a man stepping off the stage with his dignity intact. But walking away didn't mean the story was over. Because just when everyone thought the feud was buried in the past, something resurfaced that brought all the bitterness roaring back. Years after Clint Walker had stepped away from the spotlight, believing the chapter with James Arness had finally closed, something unexpected surfaced, a letter. Not from a studio, not from a journalist, but from someone who had been quietly close to both men for decades. This letter would reignite everything. It was found among the belongings of a late Hollywood producer, someone who had worked on several Western projects in the 60s and 70s. The letter, dated during the height of their rivalry, was addressed to another executive and contained private thoughts on the tension between Walker and Arness. But what made it explosive wasn't the existence of bad blood. It was the alleged manipulation behind it. In the letter, the producer revealed that James Arness had actively lobbied to keep Walker off multiple high-profile projects. He didn't just express preference, he reportedly threatened to walk from certain productions if Clint's name even came up. That type of leverage wasn't rare for a star like Arness, who became the face of a long-running TV phenomenon. But it was the cold, calculated tone that stood out. Arness, according to the letter, had felt professionally threatened by Walker's raw charisma and physical presence. The studio executives, fearing a power struggle, allegedly catered to Arness's demands without question. Clint never stood a chance, not because he lacked talent, but because the decisions were being made in rooms he was never allowed to enter. When the letter became known within a small circle of Hollywood veterans, it sparked a quiet storm. Those who had once doubted Clint's claims of sabotage now realized he had been telling the truth all along. For years, he'd been painted as the more volatile, less cooperative star. But behind the scenes, Arness had been pulling strings in ways no one publicly acknowledged. What hurt even more was that Clint never got to see that vindication while it still mattered. By the time this letter surfaced, he was already in the twilight of his life, having long come to terms with the way things ended. He'd accepted being misunderstood. But this revelation added a tragic twist. He wasn't wrong. He was just silenced. The letter never made headlines. It remained a piece of Hollywood's hidden history, passed around quietly among those who remember the old days. But it was enough to change how many viewed the feud. It wasn't just two alpha personalities clashing. It was a story of quiet sabotage, bruised pride, and a system that played favorites with devastating consequences. And yet, even with the truth finally out, there was still one question left unanswered. Did James Arness ever regret it? The answer, as it turns out, may have been hidden in his final interview, where a single sentence hinted at more than anyone expected. Years after Clint Walker's passing, and with his long-standing issues with James Arness largely settled in the public eye, Arness sat down for what would be his final interview. This was not just any casual chat. It was a retrospective look at his storied career. Arness, in his mid-80s at the time, reflected on his role in Gunsmoke, his influence on the Western genre, and inevitably his relationships with other Hollywood stars. But there was one part of the interview that caught everyone off guard, the mention of Clint Walker. It was almost a passing remark, but it stuck with viewers. When asked about his co-stars and the rivalries that had defined his career, Arness's tone changed ever so slightly. For a split second, the friendly, easygoing persona he had carefully cultivated over the years slipped away. The interviewer asked, "You and Clint Walker were both giants of the Western genre. Did you two ever have a chance to reconcile?" Arness paused, his face betraying nothing but a slight tightening of his jaw. "After what felt like an eternity," he answered quietly, "I don't know if reconciliation was ever possible." There was a lot of damage done. The room fell silent. At first, the statement didn't seem that impactful. It was, after all, just another acknowledgement of a rivalry from past. But for those who knew the backstory, it was something far more telling. It wasn't a denial, nor was it an admission of guilt. It was an acknowledgement of unresolved tensions that lingered far longer than anyone expected. And then, in the next breath, something even more surprising came next. "I wish I could say things turned out differently," Arness continued, his voice a little softer. "But in the end, there were only so many battles I could fight." The words were more than a mere reflection. They felt like a confession. For a man who had spent much of his career presenting himself as the moral center of the Western hero archetype, this was an unexpected vulnerability. Arness was known for his unwavering public demeanor, for his stoic nature and commitment to his image. But in that moment, it became clear that there was more behind the scenes, especially when it came to Clint Walker. The comment was never elaborated on further, and Arness passed away shortly after the interview aired. However, in the minds of those who followed the feud, it was the closest thing to an apology that they would ever hear. Whether or not Arness fully understood the impact of his actions, or if he truly regretted the way things turned out, remains a mystery. But the words were enough to finally acknowledge the truth in a way that his earlier actions never did. The final interview painted a picture of a man who, despite all his success and fame, couldn't escape the shadow of his past mistakes. For many, it was the last chapter in an ongoing saga of Hollywood rivalry, one that would now be remembered with a touch of regret and lost opportunity. But while Arness's words offered some closure, the legacy of Clint Walker's strength, resilience, and silent battle was now fully cemented in the hearts of fans who had long admired him. Clint may not have gotten his public apology, but he had lived his life in a way that spoke louder than any words ever could. And now, as the story of their rivalry finally came to a close, it left many wondering. If they had truly reconciled, could they have worked together again? And how different would the Western genre have been? As the years passed, the rivalry between Clint Walker and James Arness faded from the headlines, but the impact of their careers remained firmly planted in the world of entertainment. Today, their names are forever linked in the history of Western television, both standing as titans of the genre. Their characters, Walker as the towering, silent Cheyenne Bodie and Arness as the stoic, resolute, martial Matt Dillon, are etched in the collective memory of generations of fans. While the tension between the two men may have never fully been resolved, it's impossible to ignore the indelible marks they left on American television and Western culture. Cheyenne and Gunsmoke were not just shows. They were legends in their own right, each helping to define a golden age of television. The fact that both men rose to stardom in a time when the Western genre was at its peak shows the immense talent and appeal they each had. The shows they led were among the most-watched programs of their time, and their characters became the archetypes for every cowboy hero that would follow. Despite the friction that defined their off-screen relationship, Clint Walker and James Arness had something undeniable in common: their enduring appeal. Each man managed to captivate audiences for decades, even as the landscape of television changed around them. Gunsmoke ran for 20 years, making it one of the longest-running shows in TV history, while Cheyenne was a groundbreaking series that helped define the Western genre for television audiences. For Clint Walker, his legacy went beyond his work on Cheyenne. After the show ended, he remained a beloved figure in Hollywood, known for his distinctive voice and commanding presence on screen. While he didn't take as many acting roles in later years, his work in film and television was enough to secure him a lasting place in Hollywood's Hall of Fame. Walker's rugged good looks and his ability to convey vulnerability despite his tough guy persona made him a fan favorite. Yet, it was his personal integrity and quiet strength that set him apart in the industry. James Arness, too, cemented his place in television history. His role as Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke became an iconic portrayal of law and order in the American West. Though Arness would find success in other roles, particularly with How the West Was Won and his portrayal of Big John in the Alamo, it was his role on Gunsmoke that defined him. In the years following Gunsmoke, Arness continued to work in television and film, though none of his later projects achieved the same monumental success as his role as Matt Dillon. Despite their differences, Clint Walker and James Arness both endured in ways that many of their peers could not. They became symbols of their era, embodying the values and toughness that were at the heart of the Western genre. And while the public never saw them share a stage or screen together in a meaningful way, the power of their respective legacies has intertwined in a way that stands testament to both men's significance in the entertainment world. In the end, the rivalry that defined their careers became just another chapter in the saga of their lasting impact. While the personal details of their relationship may never be fully understood, it's clear that Clint Walker and James Arness both earned a place in history that transcends any animosity they may have harbored. Their enduring popularity as Western icons ensured that the stories of Cheyenne and Gunsmoke would live on forever in the hearts of fans. And as for the legacy of their rivalry, it serves as a reminder of the complexity of relationships in the world of Hollywood, where even the most heated feuds can coexist alongside mutual respect for the work and the culture they helped build.